Matt Muccigrosso here, creator of Xenoplicity and the Q system it runs on. Today's video, let's talk a little bit about crunch in a game system. Out of a tabletop role-playing game, do you want rules heavy? Do you want rules light? Do you want a complex set of rules? Do you want a simple set of rules? Do you want more simulation at your table or more abstraction? How do you pick what game system to use, and how do you know whether a game system is good or bad? When we're talking about crunch in a game system, I think the topic has been like the water has been muddied by that Ron Edwards guy and his stupid, ridiculous GNS theory. At its core, GNS theory is pseudo-intellectualism. It's a dumb, ridiculous idea that picked up so much traction because people thought it sounded smart. It's like, you ever seen that movie Glass Onion? And, you know, when I don't want to give away too much, but these people, they're all like marveling at this plot, this murder plot. And the detective, he just kind of like shuts them all down. And he's like, no, it's not smart. It's stupid. It's just stupid. And these people, they thought it sounded so smart, but it wasn't. It wasn't smart. It was dumb. It was dumb. And that's the comedy of it. That's what I consider GNS theory. It's something where a lot of people think it's profound, but it's not. It's pretentious at best. It's just nonsense. And just like the guy's an idiot. You know, you have to go to college to become that stupid. But there's lots of people do that. Unfortunately, they go to college and then they think they're intellectuals, and they don't realize how little they actually know. And unfortunately, that Ron Edwards guy is one of those people. And so he creates this GNS theory, this idea, this acronym. It means G stands for gamist, N's narrativist, and S is simulationist. And so the idea is you can divide games and people into these categories. And it's all a bunch of nonsense. Every tabletop role-playing game has all three aspects of this. The rules and mechanics are the gamey part of the game. The narration is the role play. And the simulation is the immersion that you can have in the game. That's it. And that's not how he defines it, but that's how I'm defining it. And that's the truth of it is that all of us in this hobby like various aspects of this, because all of these things go together to make a tabletop role-playing game. You can't have a tabletop role-playing game without some measure of all three of these things. And this guy wants to try to psychoanalyze this. I have as much respect for that Ron Edwards guy and his little GNS theory as I would someone that tried to do this with Monopoly. If you took the game Monopoly and you decided that you were gonna create this whole like thought experiment and this intellectual experiment and write books on the subject of how some people play Monopoly and they're just trying to get the money, and other people play Monopoly and they're just trying to get the land, it's so stupid. I can't even do this with a straight face because of how dumb an idea this is. But let's seriously break this down, okay? There's good types of crunch and then there's bad types of crunch. So let's dive into that. What is an example of good crunch? Okay. Traveler. Traveler is good crunch. Right? Traveler, you can have all kinds of different technology levels. You can be on a spaceship with laser guns. You can be on a planet that's very similar to Earth, like right now in modern times with modern firearms. You can have in vehicles, you know, that you would see around you in today's world. You can be in a planet that is very medieval, okay? And so you're dealing with like, you know, archaic armor and you know, blades and things like that. You can be in primitive planets where they have even like just really basic equipment. All of that's in that core book. But the game itself, that doesn't change the complexity of the game system. The core mechanic of Traveler is very simple. And so you can have those various things to tack onto it, and it's never an issue. These are good types of crunch. They're layered complexity on top of itself. But the core mechanic is simple. It flows. It's intuitive. Xenoplicity works the same way. You get your dice together, you roll the dice, you tell the game master, and he tells you whether you passed or failed, whether you succeeded or not, and you narrate the results. Okay, easy peasy. Now, what's bad crunch? Well, here's a good example. Dragon Age. And why is it bad crunch? Why does this not stack up to those other games I just mentioned? Well, here's why. Because in Dragon Age, you roll 3d6, and really any Fantasy Age game works this way. You roll the 3d6, and if you roll a certain result on the dice, then you have to stop the game, You have to open up the book, you have to look at a table, and there's a list of things that the player has to then choose from before the game can continue, right? This is bad crunch because what it does is it stops the game. It literally pauses the game so a player can make a decision that's in the book, where the game can't just keep flowing. It can't keep playing. You're pausing the game to do something else. There's lots of games that do this. I talked previously in another video about games that I hate. I talked about Burning Wheel does this, where you have to play certain maneuver cards in a certain way and see how they stack up with other moves in the game. It's like this mini game inside of a game. That's bad mechanics. This is bad types of crunch. These are things that actually slow the gameplay down or stop it altogether. This is what you don't want in a game system. But if you have layered complexity, if we just have a lot of details and a lot of things in the game, well, you just use what you're comfortable using, right? I don't need to use every rule that's in Shadowrun. If I want to have a gunfight, I can have a gunfight, and I don't have to put in every modifier that the book lists. I just use what I want to use from the system, and I just keep going with it. But there are some game systems where the complexity is built into the core mechanic in a way where you can't avoid it. So I don't think we should be having the discussion of light versus heavy rules or things like that. I think the conversation more is, how do the game mechanics actually work? Because there are some game mechanics that are just fundamentally better than other game mechanics. And so this is, I think, a better conversation to have. But this is not the conversation most of us ever get into. Most of us don't have this conversation because that requires a little nuance. It requires you to know a system. Instead, people just kind of write systems off as being complex or light. And unfortunately, this creates this weird divide in the hobby where people are okay with some games despite them having bad mechanics, but they're called rules-light games. And yet they still play slower than some other games that actually have more crunch, but are considered, because they're considered rules-heavy games, people don't ever want to give them a chance, even though they play faster, okay? Another thing I see people talk about is there are people online, especially different channels, that talk about how you can't put firearms into a tabletop role-playing game that's built for fantasy because it adds too many moving parts, it adds too much complexity, yada, yada, yada. That's a bunch of nonsense. Look at an example here. Let's look at Star Wars D20. This is a game that has lightsabers and vibroblades and archaic armor, okay? But it's also got grenades and guns and gun turrets and starships and missiles and all those things in this one book. It's about the same size as any other D20 D&D game. And this is really a good example because unlike all those other games that I mentioned that are different systems, this is D&D. This is just reskinning to be Star Wars. The Saga edition here, this game is somewhere between 3.5 and 4th edition. So how do you do guns in a D&D game? How would you make that work? Well, let's take a look. Pistol, 3d6 damage. Boom, there you go. Rifle, 3d8 damage. Okay. Heavy rifle, 3d10. Frag grenade, 4d6. Boom. Simple. Easy. Doesn't require a lot of complexity. Doesn't require a lot of rule changes. Doesn't require really anything at all. Because it's a D20 game, I bet you could just take things right out of this book and put it into your average D&D game, and it would work just fine. How about options, right? Like, oh, you have guns. Well, you might have different options, right? Okay, well, let's look at that. Burst fire. Okay, -5 penalty on your attack to deal 2 extra dice of damage. Boom. Done. There you go. You got burst fire too. There you go. That's how you do that. It's not rocket science, guys. It really isn't. And they say the examples they give are things like, well, what about different types of bullets? If we're going to have firearms in my game, well, I need different types of bullets. Really? Do you have different types of arrows in your D&D game? Does D&D give you different options for different types of arrows? Because you know there's different types of arrows too, right? If you did archery, you would know that. Because just like there's different types of bullets, there's different types of arrowheads. So do you have rules for that? Is that something you take into account? Or do you just abstract it to just an arrow is an arrow? It's just what it is people become so used to certain levels of abstraction that they don't even consider it abstraction. They're comfortable with the level of complexity they've already accepted. And so it's hard for them to imagine something different than what they're already doing. Let's talk about simulation versus abstraction. In my own game, Xenoplicity, we do both. We use high levels of simulation as well as high levels of abstraction at different parts of the game. And you might say, well, how does that make sense? What, it's either one or the other, right? No, it's not. And guys, and this is why the GNS theory is so stupid. We're talking about a game of play, pretend, and make believe. We're talking about a game of imagination. So in Xenoplicity, what do I mean by I use high levels of abstraction as well as simulation? Okay, so when it comes to getting hit, when it comes to taking damage, when you suffer wounds in this game, okay, I would argue that wounds in Xenoplicity is more simulationist than D&D's hit points, okay, hands down, right? In D&D, you can just keep getting hit and hit and hit, and there's really no impact on that until you reach 0, HP, and then if you get 1 point of healing, you just jump right back up. That's not simulation at all. That is abstract to an absurd level. It is so abstract. People can't even define what a hit point even means. There's this vague sense of what it is, whether it's luck or your level of heroism or you're actually, how many hits you can take by, combat. But no one even knows, right? There's some implications based on things like heal wounds, or light healing, right? That you can heal somebody. So obviously something's happened to them. But the truth is, there's actually no injury that happens in D&D. So, that's super abstract, right? Wounds are much more simulationist. You suffer these wounds, and depending on what kind of wound it is, you're gonna have to deal with that until it heals. And also we have a hit location roll that you make in this game. So, maybe you get hit in the head, maybe you get hit in the arm, maybe you get hit in the leg. You can roll for it. And so that it's out of your hands. Fate decides, right? And to me, that's actually more immersive than a game master just dictating it by fiat, or not wanting to dictate it because he doesn't want to seem like he's playing favorites, or he doesn't want to hit you in the head because that might mess you up more than if he hits you in the leg. Whatever, you know what I'm saying. However, at the same time, in Xenoplicity, we don't count bullets, we don't count ammo. These are things that can be done with a consumable roll, right? You roll a die. It's a luck roll. And depending on whether you pass or fail, depends on how much, whether you're out of ammo or not. And you might say, well, why did you do that? Why is one abstract to the absurd, and why is one simulationist to the extreme? And so this is what I'm getting at, because a turn in Xenoplicity is an abstract period of time. It's not one swing of the sword equals 6 seconds. Instead, with Xenoplicity, one turn, okay, is 60 seconds. It's a minute. It's a minute of game time takes place every turn of this game. That harkens back to really old school D&D, because I believe in an initial Dungeons and Dragons, or maybe Chainmail, I believe that was the case too. It might have even been that way in Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, although I can't remember what system they made the switch. I don't know, but there was a time period where that was true for D&D as well, and I like that. I like minute turns. It's easy for game purpose tracking as far as how much time has passed in the game, how long a fight has lasted, but also it's really, really handy because we're not saying that every roll of the die is a single attack, or every roll of the die is a single jump. We're saying that you roll the dice, and then over a minute of time, you either succeed or you fail at whatever you're trying to do. So if you're attacking somebody, let's say you're using a gun or a bow and arrow, and you're attacking somebody, and you roll and you hit. Well, that doesn't mean that you just shot one bullet or fired one arrow, and that's what killed that person, or that's what hit that person. No, it means that you're in a gunfight, and so maybe you fire 3, 4, 5, 6 times. It's abstracted to match the time frame that's being covered in that moment. Okay, how many bullets did you actually fire? That's why it's a consumable roll, because the dice are going to determine that, right? Maybe you roll that consumable roll and you succeed. Well, then maybe you only had to fire a couple of rounds before you actually hit the person. Or maybe you had to empty your whole magazine before you finally killed them. And to me, while that's more abstract, it's also more immersive because I'm not counting bullets while I'm in a gunfight. No one does that. No one is counting bullets while they're in a gunfight, okay? With your adrenaline pumping. Now granted, I'm not saying I've been in a gunfight, but I shoot guns on a regular basis. And I'm gonna tell you, even when I'm at the gun range or even when I'm out with my friends shooting in a field and we're just having an awesome time, we're not counting our bullets while we're firing that gun, okay? And that's not the way it works. You just keep shooting until eventually it goes click, click, and then you're out. Okay, and so I don't try to count every bullet that's left in that magazine. I don't want people doing that at the table. Instead, you're just gonna roll a die. It takes literally a half a second, and you know whether you're running out of ammo or whether you're not. That's how we do it in Xenoplicity. That's just one game example, but my point is this gives you an example of how you can have high levels of abstraction as well as high levels of simulation in the same game system. And I don't think Xenoplicity is alone in this. There's plenty of game systems out there that, while they may be very simulationist in some aspects, they also use high levels of abstraction in others. There's nothing wrong with that. That's not what determines immersion. That's not what determines whether it's a good game or not. You can have varying degrees of these things within a system, okay? Immersion is you being engaged at the table in the game world, okay? It doesn't mean you forget you're at the table. It's not some weird mental condition where like you check out and you're not you anymore. No, you're still you. You're playing a game, okay? But here's an example to give you the proper perspective of exactly what I'm talking about. When you were a kid, or maybe like me, I have kids. I have 3 kids. So when my kids are playing a video game, or when you were playing a video game when you were a kid, there were times where you were in the middle of a level, or you were in the middle of a fight, or you were in the middle of trying to do some kind of challenge, and you were like hyper focused on what was happening in the game, to the point where you were oblivious to everything happening around you in the real world, right? Because you were so focused on what you were doing in the game, right? It's not that you thought you were Mario. It's not that you thought you were Master Chief, okay? But you're so focused on playing that character that in that moment, you might even start to like bob and weave, like to miss shots or kind of lean forward or lean back. You're literally physically getting like invested in this. And if someone was trying to talk to you while you're in the middle of that intense moment, maybe your parents try to say like, hey, they have to say it like 3 or 4 times before you snap out of it. And you go, oh, sorry. I was focused on what I was doing here, right? That's immersion. Okay, and that's what you want at your table. You want the players so focused on playing the game, playing characters in the game, that they're not thinking to look at their phone, and they're not thinking to have jokes across the table, and they're not thinking to have out-of-game conversations or to metagame by trying to like listen in on what a game master is telling a player over in the corner. They're not doing any of those things. They're just playing their character. They're engaged with that. Okay, that's immersion. That's what you want at your table. Here's what you want out of a game system. You want a game system that provides rules for operation and structure, okay? And the mechanics of a game need to be such that they allow for easy resolution of things in the game world and then get out of the way. And they don't impede or limit role-playing at the table, okay? And this is at the core of this issue because it's really a non-issue. You can have great roleplay in any game. The RP aspect of any tabletop role-playing game can be inserted or removed based on your table and how they're playing the game, okay? Because you can do that with anything. However, some games are better at facilitating roleplay at the table than others. There are some games where the mechanics literally will take you out of immersion. And so this is what I'm getting at. The GNS theory is nonsense. And the idea that rules light games are somehow better than rules heavy games, I think that's nonsense too. I don't think that a rules light game is any better per se than a rules heavy game. At the end of the day, whether a game system has a lot of complex rules or very simple rules, both are throttled by the game master. Okay, when I played, let me give you an example. Fantasy Trip, okay? These are 20-page little pamphlets, okay? Super easy, super simple to play this game, okay? Very little rules in here. It really is just a combat simulator, okay? But when me and my friends played this game, we added all kinds of social rules to the game, and we role-played this to the 9th degree, okay? It's not that you can't, but there's no rules in here for that. But it didn't matter. We used it just fine. You know, we made social roles, even though there's no social roles in this game. There's nothing in this game about that, but we implemented it because we wanted to. So we took a simple game that had very little rules and we made it complex, right? And you can take a complex game like Shadowrun and you can just strip out the stuff that you don't use. Cool, there's a rule in there you don't like, just don't bring it up. There's a system in there, like a layered system of complexity that you're not a fan of. Don't use it, right? I don't use every rule in these books. You think I'm gonna look up every rule in Exalted? I'm not doing that. I don't do that for any game I play, right? I know what the essence of the system is. I know how the core mechanics operate. And then I make judgment calls and house rules as needed to facilitate gameplay at the table, because I'm not going to have the rules get in the way of my immersion, of my role play at the table, right? But I know enough of the system that it's not like I'm breaking the game by making a house rule or a judgment call in a moment. I just go with it, okay? If you know a system, or if you understand the essence of it, then you don't have to stop at the game to look up a rule. You can just make a judgment call. You can just say, yeah, okay, roll a 15 or higher, and you succeed at that. Make a judgment call and just have someone roll something, and if they succeed, great, they do. You just need to know whether they pass or fail and how long it takes. At the end of the day, these are the core things that you need when you're in the moment when you're calling on a roll at your table. That's it. It's not overly complicated, guys. And people just try to make this into so much more than it is. It's ridiculous. I guess what I'm trying to get at is this whole idea of rules light versus rules crunchy. It's an irrelevant conversation, and I wish people would just put it to bed. I really do. Every game that I own, there are some rules in it that I don't like. And every game that I own has various levels of complexity, but when I'm playing them at my table, I make it work. I make it simple because, again, I use what I use, and then I house rule or judgment call the rest. And that's true no matter what I'm playing.